It was still early when I returned from the funeral home, the silence in my rental car louder than any church bell I'd heard that morning. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled into our driveway, unsure if I was ready to face the inside of the house alone for the first time. But I didn't get that far. My key didn't fit. I tried again, thinking my grief had clouded something simple. But the lock had been changed. The heavy brass handle, once slightly loose, now stood firm, unfamiliar. Panic crept in, not loud and screaming, but quiet and cold, like fog settling in your lungs. I knocked, then harder. No answer. Then a shuffle. Then voices. Then the door cracked open, just enough for a face I hadn't seen in years. Loretta. She wore black, but not for mourning. It was a fashionable black, ironed, precise, with pearls that looked like they had never been tucked away for a funeral drawer. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're here," she said, like I was a guest who had overstayed my welcome at my own doorstep. I couldn't speak. "You don't live here anymore," she continued, already turning her back. "My son paid for this house, so now it belongs to us." She said, "us," as though I hadn't shared 22 years of silence, of dinners eaten in front of the television, of checking Mark's breathing during his chemo because he said hospitals were too expensive. I stepped inside before she could close the door. The entryway looked different. Boxes everywhere, labeled with names I recognized. Gerald's books, Mother's kitchenware, den sofa. Not a single one was mine. "Where's Mark's will?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She paused at the bottom of the stairs. "There was no will. You should go. You're not family anymore." That word hit me like glass in the mouth. Not family? After all I'd done? But I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I turned back to the driveway, pulled out my phone, and made the first of many calls. And when I reached the person I needed, I laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but the kind that spills out when the truth is about to burn everything down. Because the house was mine. I had the deed. Mark just never knew. I didn't go back to the motel that night. I drove to the law office instead, the one Mark never liked me visiting, even though he said he had nothing to hide. Marta Caldwell was still there, God bless her. She was the kind of lawyer who wore thick glasses on a beaded chain and kept her files in color-coded binders that hadn't seen a cloud backup in their life. She knew the story without needing to be told twice. "You still have the paperwork?" I asked. She didn't blink. "Of course. Mark never filed the override. He said he would, but he never came back. It's still yours." It felt strange, hearing it said out loud. Even stranger was how calm I felt. She handed me a folder. "Take this to the sheriff's office. You'll want to get ahead of it before Loretta does something more public." And that was Loretta's way, wasn't it? Always making a scene with just enough lipstick and tears to win sympathy. I remembered the Thanksgiving she cried in front of my in-laws because I'd brought a store-bought pie. Mark scolded me in the car all the way home. "She's delicate," he said. "You know how much appearances matter to her." What he didn't say, but I already knew, was that he'd never once defended me in front of her. As I drove to the sheriff's office, I caught myself wondering something I'd never dared ask when Mark was alive. Did he ever really want me? Or was I just the quiet woman he thought his mother could tolerate? The deputy took my papers with barely a glance. "We'll call them," he said. "But you should have a lawyer on standby. They don't seem like the type to leave quietly." He was right. When I got back to the motel, there were voicemails. One from Gerald, Mark's younger brother, who hadn't spoken to me since 2011. Another from a number I didn't recognize, but I didn't need to. Loretta had started recruiting, but I had no intention of going to war on her terms. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I poured myself a small glass of wine, sat down at the tiny desk in the corner of the motel room, and began to write a list of everything I had lost and everything I still owned. At the very top, underlined 3 times, "The house is mine." Not because of a fight, not because of pity, because Mark had signed it over 5 years ago, right before the first diagnosis. Because deep down, maybe, he knew what his mother was capable of, and what I would have to do when he was gone. Gerald called again the next morning. I let it ring. Then he texted, "I'm not Loretta. Call me." He wasn't wrong. Gerald had always been different. Quieter, less involved. He'd left town years ago after a fallout with Mark that I'd only half understood. Something about a failed investment and a girlfriend they'd both dated in college. Whatever the reason, Gerald hadn't been at our wedding. But now, he was suddenly interested. I met him at a diner on the edge of town, somewhere public, neutral. He was thinner than I remembered, salt and pepper at the temples, and wearing a suit that looked about 2 sizes too large for him. "I heard what happened," he said as I sat down. "Loretta's doing her usual thing." I didn't respond. I just waited. He looked at me, tired. "She told the family you were squatting. Said you tricked Mark when he was sick." There it was. The narrative. "I have the deed," I said. "Signed 5 years ago, before he got sick." Gerald nodded slowly, running a hand through his thinning hair. "She won't care. You know that, right? She'll tell the church, the neighbors, everyone. She thrives on being the wounded one." I stared at the swirling cream in my coffee. "Then let her." He leaned in. "Why did he sign it over to you? That's not something he would have done lightly." I considered lying, but then realized the truth might hurt more. Because he was scared of her. He told me once, if anything ever happened to him, she'd try to take everything. He didn't want that. Gerald exhaled. "I believe it. She did the same to my father's estate, spent it all before the will was even read." So there it was. A pattern. A legacy of quiet theft wrapped in pearls and smiles. "I don't want a war," I said, "but I'm not giving her the house." "You won't have to," he said. "I'll talk to her." I didn't believe him. Not really. But I nodded anyway. That afternoon, I drove past the house. Loretta's car was still in the driveway. Gerald's was parked beside it. Curtains were drawn tight, as if the house itself was bracing for impact. I didn't go inside. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the storage unit I'd quietly rented the year Mark first got sick. That was the same year he'd given me the house papers, wrapped in a manila envelope with a shaky, just in case, scribbled in his handwriting. I unlocked the door. Inside were boxes I'd packed years ago, just in case things turned ugly. I had hoped I'd never need them. There was a photo album in one of the boxes. I hadn't planned to open it, but my hand moved before I could stop it. On the first page, Mark and I were standing by the lake at his family's cabin. We looked happy. Maybe we were. Maybe I'd convinced myself we were. The truth is, I hadn't really cried. Not after the diagnosis, not at the funeral, not even after Loretta shut the door in my face. But that photo, of his arm slung lazily over my shoulder, of a summer I barely remembered, made something break loose. Not grief, exactly, but a deep, hollow ache for everything I'd let slide in the name of peace. He never told his family about the deed. That was part of the agreement. "They'd never forgive me," he'd said. "Especially her." I'd nodded, like I always did. Always the quiet one. Always the one who didn't make waves. But waves had come anyway. 2 days later, the sheriff's office called. "We served the papers," the deputy said. "She didn't take it well." I didn't ask for details. I could imagine it. Loretta gasping, clutching her pearls, accusing me of forging her dead son's name. But they knew the signature was real. Witnessed, notarized, filed. And so did she. Still, Loretta was far from done. That evening, a local pastor called me. "Loretta's been in touch," he said carefully. "She's very distressed." "I'm sure she is." "She's organizing a memorial event for Mark, at the house." The air froze around me. "She has no right," I said. "I understand your position," the pastor replied, "but she says it's what Mark would have wanted." Would he? I didn't know anymore. Maybe he would have preferred Loretta's tears to my silence. Maybe he really believed he could keep the peace forever by hiding the truth. But I knew one thing with certainty. He had given me the house. Not Loretta. Not Gerald. Me. And I was done being erased. I showed up the next day, just as folding chairs were being arranged on the lawn. Gerald stood awkwardly by the porch. Loretta was already in full display mode, hugging neighbors, crying into tissues, gesturing toward the windows as if she still lived there. She saw me, and her smile vanished. "What are you doing here?" I walked straight up the front steps, unlocked the door with my key, and looked her in the eye. I live here. The silence that followed my words didn't last long. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Loretta stood frozen on the porch, tissue still in hand, as if she were waiting for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. No one did. I stepped into the foyer. The air was thick with artificial rose air freshener and a kind of tension I hadn't felt since my wedding day. I half expected someone to grab my arm, but instead, chairs scraped on the lawn and polite excuses began to echo around the yard. People were leaving. Gerald approached the doorway but didn't come in. I told her to call it off, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. She wouldn't listen. She never listens, I replied, my voice flat. Inside, I found my kitchen stripped, cabinets open, dishes boxed. My photo frames were gone from the hallway wall. In their place were prints of Loretta with Mark, childhood, graduation, a wedding where I had apparently never existed. She hadn't just taken over the space, she had begun erasing me. I stood in the center of the living room and felt it, a flicker of the anger I'd buried for years. Anger at Mark for always choosing silence over truth. Anger at myself for allowing it. I walked back outside. Loretta was still there, trembling now, not from grief, but rage. Her voice shook. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "This house should never have been yours. You were never one of us. Mark was ashamed of you." I didn't flinch. "Then why did he give it to me?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Because you manipulated him. You preyed on his weakness." "No," I said. "I protected him from yours." For a second, her mask slipped. Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected that. Before she could recover, I turned and closed the front door behind me. I locked it, my lock, and leaned against it for a long while, breathing in the unfamiliar quiet. The air was mine again, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own life. That night, I slept in the master bedroom, alone. No pictures of Mark on the nightstand, no echoes of his tired apologies. Just me and silence. Real silence. Peaceful, earned. But peace never lasts long when Loretta's involved. The next morning, I received an envelope slid under the door. Inside, a notice of intent to contest the deed in probate court. I took the envelope to Marta that same afternoon. She opened it with her usual efficiency, no dramatic sighs, no dramatics, just a quiet hum as she skimmed the contents. "She's claiming undue influence," she said. "Says Mark was not of sound mind when he signed over the deed." I sat across from her, hands clasped in my lap. "But he signed it before his diagnosis." Marta nodded. "And we have the medical records to prove he was lucid at the time. Not only that, he wasn't even under treatment yet. She's bluffing, hoping to rattle you." She was rattling me, just not in the way she hoped. The house was mine. But it had become something else now, a battlefield. Every creak of the floorboards, every empty shelf, every missing photo reminded me that my marriage had never been safe. It had been a negotiation, a quiet, invisible war. And now the final battle was being fought over wood, brick, and a piece of paper with a signature she couldn't stand to accept. I didn't sleep much that week, not because of fear, but because of all the things I'd never said. To Mark, to Loretta, to myself. I began writing them down in a notebook I found in the guest room, a list of moments I'd let pass. His dismissive tone when I wanted to paint the kitchen, his refusal to let me invite my own sister for Christmas, Loretta's condescending smiles at every family dinner, and my silence. That was the hardest part to write. One evening, a knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Gerald again, holding a grocery bag. "I figured you haven't been eating much," he said, lifting it like a peace offering. Inside were simple things: milk, bread, canned soup, a bag of apples. Nothing fancy, but oddly grounding. "You don't owe me anything," I said, letting him in. "I'm not doing this for you," he replied quietly. "I'm doing it because she's losing her mind, and someone needs to stay sane." We ate in silence at the kitchen table, surrounded by blank walls and empty hooks. Halfway through, he looked up. "She's digging. Calling old friends, cousins, anyone who'll say Mark didn't trust you." "Let her," I said. "The truth doesn't need help." He studied me. "You're different." I'm done playing their game. And I meant it. I wasn't just going to fight to keep the house. I was going to rebuild myself inside it. The court hearing was scheduled for a month later, but the trial had already started, in whispers, in phone calls, in thinly veiled messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. 2 cousins I barely knew emailed me long, awkward letters filled with concern. One offered to mediate between Loretta and me. The other asked if I had considered just walking away to keep the peace. Peace. That word had been a noose around my neck for years. Marta encouraged me to stay quiet in public. "Let the documents speak for you," she said. "They'll try to provoke you. Don't give them anything." I followed her advice, mostly, but I did one thing. I called the local paper. I didn't give them a statement. I didn't do an interview. I just emailed them a scanned copy of the deed transfer. No commentary, just the facts. The article ran 2 days later. Dispute over widow's home sparks legal battle in quiet suburb. There were no names, but everyone knew. The next day, I saw Loretta on the sidewalk outside the church. Her hair was set perfectly, her posture straight. But her eyes? They were wild. She hadn't expected the truth to be louder than her sobs. Gerald came by again that evening, his voice lower than usual. "She's furious. She said you're humiliating her." "I haven't said a word," I replied. "That's what's killing her," he said. We sat on the back porch. The air was sharp with early autumn. A breeze rustled through the trees, pulling loose a single leaf that drifted into my lap. I held it for a moment. It was brittle, light, like something that had already let go. "I don't know why I'm still helping her," Gerald muttered. "She used me. She always has." "Because she's your mother," I said gently. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at me, truly looked. "You know she told Mark not to marry you, right?" I nodded. "He told me. He just never stood up to her." "I should have," Gerald said. "Maybe then he would have too." The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't cruel. It was shared. A small, buried truth finally given air. That night, I replaced the old photos in the hallway, not out of spite, but because they were mine. My moments, my story, and it was time it took up space. The court date drew closer like a storm cloud that refused to pass. Each morning I woke in the house, my house, and waited for the mail slot to snap. Letters from Loretta's attorney arrived in heavy, thick envelopes. Most were empty threats, accusations of emotional coercion, claims that I had isolated Mark from his family. I didn't respond to any of them. Marta was handling it all, calm as ever. "This isn't a courtroom battle," she told me. "It's psychological warfare, and she's losing." Still, Loretta had one more card to play. It was Gerald who told me. "She's calling character witnesses." I blinked. "From where?" "Church friends, old neighbors, anyone who'll say you were cold, controlling, absent." I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. She was doing what she'd always done, rewriting the story, playing victim, twisting silence into guilt. But this time, I had something she didn't. Proof. Marta helped me organize a packet, notarized copies of the deed, email correspondence with Mark about the transfer, medical records confirming his diagnosis came after the signing, and photos, ones Loretta hadn't managed to erase. Photos of Mark and me in the house, him smiling, holding my hand, signing the envelope. "I want you to testify," Marta said softly. I hesitated. "You know how she works. She'll twist every word." "Yes," Marta said. "But this isn't for her. It's for you." For me. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights low. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat with the stillness. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. This wasn't just about a house. It never had been. It was about all the things I had given up, my voice, my boundaries, my name on the mailbox, and the quiet power of finally taking them back. A few days before the hearing, Gerald dropped off a manila envelope. "These are emails," he said, "from Mark, to me, from a year before he died." Inside were printed copies. One line stood out. "If something happens to me, make sure she keeps the house. It's hers. You know that." I looked up. Gerald's eyes were glassy. He knew. I whispered. He nodded. And so do I now. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for longer than I care to admit, not out of vanity, but out of disbelief. That I was still here. That I had made it this far without screaming, without breaking. I wore a navy blouse, plain slacks, and no jewelry. I didn't want to look wealthy or polished. I wanted to look like what I was, a woman who'd been through enough. Marta met me at the courthouse steps. She didn't offer encouragement or cliché lines. She just nodded once, like a soldier heading into battle beside me. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected. Loretta sat 2 benches ahead, wrapped in black as if we were burying Mark all over again. Her attorney, a man with slicked back hair and a practiced frown, kept flipping through a leather folder like he was waiting to pounce. Gerald sat behind me. He gave me a slight nod when I turned. I couldn't tell if it was apology or support. Maybe both. The judge entered, an older woman with sharp eyes and no tolerance for theatrics. She read through the documents in silence before raising her gaze. I see both parties are prepared to present arguments regarding the ownership of the property in question, she said. But I also see that the deed is signed, notarized, and predates Mr. Keller's illness by nearly a year. Loretta's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we believe Mrs. Keller, he refused to say my name, exerted emotional pressure during a vulnerable time. Do you have evidence of coercion? The judge asked. He stammered. Not concrete evidence, but... Then it's speculation, she interrupted. Still, the judge allowed Loretta to speak. And speak she did. Tears carefully timed, voice cracking as she painted herself the grieving mother, abandoned by a cruel daughter-in-law who cut her off from her dying son. Then it was my turn. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I told the truth. About the quiet dinners. The paperwork Mark brought home himself. The way he whispered, I trust you more than anyone, when he handed me the signed deed. I ended with one sentence. He gave me the house because he knew she would try to take it. That was all. When I returned to my seat, Loretta didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her jaw set in silent fury. The judge paused before speaking. Unless compelling evidence appears to contradict what has been presented, the court recognizes the deed as legally binding. Loretta's breath caught. I heard it, but the judge wasn't done. This hearing is adjourned until Friday for final review and formal ruling. It wasn't over, not yet, but we both knew how it would end. Ruling came quietly on a Friday morning. I was alone when Marta called. I'd expected a drawn-out speech, legal jargon, perhaps even some final twist, but there was none of that. She ruled in our favor, Marta said simply. The house is yours. No further action needed. I thanked her and hung up. No tears, no cheers. Just silence. Deep and full, not empty this time. Outside, the air smelled like rain, though none had come yet. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, barefoot. For a long moment, I just stood there, feeling the boards beneath my feet, the ones Loretta once claimed her son had paid for. They were mine now. They always had been. I didn't hear from Loretta after the ruling. No calls, no letters. She vanished from the neighborhood as suddenly as she had invaded it. Word spread fast in small towns, but no one said anything to me directly. Some neighbors offered short, hesitant smiles. Others kept their distance. That was fine. I wasn't looking for applause. Gerald came by 2 days later. He didn't knock, just stood in the yard until I noticed him. She's staying with my cousin in Denver, he said. Told them you stole her son's memory. I nodded. Let her. He paused. I think I needed to see you win. Not because I didn't believe you, but because I wanted to believe something could still be fair. He handed me a small, worn book, Mark's old leather-bound planner. Found it while cleaning out Mom's things. Thought you might want it. I opened it later that night. Most pages were blank, but in the back, written in his familiar, sharp handwriting, were 5 words. She always made this home. That night, I finally cried. Not because I missed Mark, not because of Loretta, but because for the first time, the silence in the house didn't feel like absence. It felt like mine. I planted flowers in the front yard the next day. Something Loretta always said was tacky. Pansies, Hydrangeas, sunflowers, bright, unruly things that didn't care for straight lines. Just like me. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a beginning, a quiet one, earned. And as I sat on the porch that evening, coffee in hand, the wind picked up gently, brushing against the wind chime Mark had hung years ago. It had stopped working long ago, rusted in place. But now it rang.